Welcome to this presentation of our paper, Open Data-Driven Usability Improvements of Static Code Analysis and its Challenges. This is work by myself, Emma Söderberg, and my colleagues Luke Church and Martin Höst. I'd like to start to say something about the context and static code analysis. So in software development, developers use many tools. They use IDEs and code review tools, continuous integration tools, and many others for editing and review and testing and analysis. And in this mix, we have static code analysis to present errors, warnings, and sometimes fixes. So for instance, we have compilers that present error messages when something's wrong in the code. We have potentially warnings showing up in a continuous integration server like a Jenkins instance, possibly connected to a code review instance. And these results from static analyzers, they offer developers assistance, they offload them, they offer automation and many benefits, and help to find some of the things, of all the things that developers have to think about. However, there are a bunch of usability issues that have been reported for static analysis results, issues around integration of results when developers have to go to a totally different tool to inspect results. And at some point, eventually they stop to do that, or they find messages to be incomprehensible, or they find too many false positives in results, or they just find too many results. And these issues have been reported, for instance, in this study from a couple of years back. Why don't software developers use static analysis tools to find bugs? So why all these problems? Well, one hypothesis here is that there's a lack of feedback. So it's a bit like we're throwing the static analyzers over the wall, and then we may get feedback on how they're doing and in order to improve them or tune them or whatever options we may have for this particular analyzer. So one strategy then is to introduce more feedback and to gather feedback from how developers are perceiving analyzers. So this is an illustration of one such approach for data-driven usability improvements of static code analysis. And in this picture here, we have analyzers illustrated over here, gathered in this box, which takes care of integration of results from these analyzers, for instance, into code review as so-called robot comments next to human comments, and illustrated with this blue box here. And this little pink square is supposed to illustrate that there is a feedback button on these robot comments. So developers who for some reason find this not useful can click that button, potentially provide more information. And all this feedback can be gathered again on the system side to introduce or present plots like this one, helping out to sort of see when an analyzer category, a new analyzer category being rolled out, perhaps that's causing a lot of noise or is not being comprehended by developers. And then appropriate actions can be taken on this side here by the maintainer of the system to improve the analyzer, configure it differently, or something like that. This strategy has been was used for the first time in the tricolor system at Google, which was reported in this paper a couple of years back. We've further kind of thought about this approach in other work where we thought about it in a more general sense beyond specifically code analysis. And then we've also tried to implement this approach in a different context outside of Google, where it originally was tried with some initial success. And then now in this paper, we're trying to sort of explore this beyond one organization. So if we take that previous picture, you can kind of see that as something happening within one organization. But as you know, we have many other organizations in industry, big and small. And one thing that happens between many organizations is that they actually share code, and especially in areas which is more commodity to them, which isn't their product code. So for instance, sharing code, there is an openness to share code around developer tools like the Jenkins system or the Garrett code review tool, which you see, as you see, it's being used in many different organizations here in the picture. So the question is then, so if there's an openness to sharing code to developer tools, How about data? Can we also see a path to sharing data as a way to improve these tools, which are otherwise then commodity? So illustrated by this picture here, trying to move this system out into the middle here in between organizations to create a community around useful static code analysis. So this is the motivation behind our study. So from this motivation, we formulated this research question. How do the views of using and sharing open source software developer tools carry across to open data-driven tuning of software developer tools? And to gather data about this, we decided to run a focus group study. We created a protocol centered around situations that we capture here with our questions, Q1 to Q4, about using and sharing analyzers and then data, and the different variations of that. We ran this study at the virtual workshop where industry representatives met people from the university. So people were invited from the community of this workshop, and there was an hour of a presentation, and then we had a second hour of focus groups. And during the presentations, the approach that I just mentioned was introduced, and these questions, and then people were invited to take part in this focus group. We ended up getting 11 participants representing 8 companies and 1 university. We divided these participants into 3 groups with 1 author leading each group. After informed consent, we recorded these focus groups. And the clear limitation here is that this study was carried out in Sweden, so these developers were all from Sweden. Then we analyzed the data by coding these transcripts, which all the authors took part in, coding their own group. And then we went through 2 coding phases. In the initial coding phase, we selected a couple of papers, and then each author extracted codes from these papers. And then we merged and reduced these codes into a final set of codes that we all agreed upon. And then we coded the transcripts based on the situations illustrated with these questions over here and the codes from this final set. And we used this coding as a signpost into the transcripts where developers, our participants, were talking about different aspects. And then we also did a coding round to kind of summarize the view of each participant with regard to each situation, using codes listed here: benefit, challenges, both benefits or challenges, or no opinion. And generally, a limitation in the study is that we have limited data and we can't really make any quantitative claims. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about our results, and I'll use this grid illustrating the different situation and the situational codes that we used for analyzer data, use, and share. Starting with analyzer use. I'll use this kind of illustration here to show our participants, 1 box per participant, and the legend here shows the mapping of colors to benefit, challenges, both, and no opinion. And for analyzer and use, this is the kind of result that we got. So in generally, our participants saw both benefits and challenges. So for instance, 1 participant said that pretty much everything we run here is open source. But at the same time, they expressed opinions like there is certainly a security aspect here, either complex source or not that widely adopted. So some precaution in what kind of open source, how open source was used. Then when considering analyzers and sharing, we got a slightly more sort of beneficial view on this, where 1 developer expressed that for me, it is modern software development culture. Open source is a natural part of our ecosystem. And if that should flourish, we need to give back too. And then at the same time, also expressing concern that currently there's a legal question. We have not, as a company, come to any conclusion about contributing with code to open source projects. And then moving on to data. Again, primarily positive, but at the same time, also 1 participant only saw challenges. Illustrated here, if it is totally anonymous, how do you know that it's real data so that you don't disable a check that has actually been, and then a little bit further down, some government wants everyone to disable a buffer overflow check, for instance. And at the same time, they were positive. So what data whatever data that can make the analyzers more useful, I think that would be great. And then finally, as we move to data and sharing, we then started to lean over more towards challenges, with no participant really only expressing benefits. And these are illustrations of quotes from our data. The fake data we would never disclose, or I believe that they would basically not do it, or it's just impossible to give a general answer to whether they would be willing to share data. So I think the takeaways here from our point of view, and captured to some extent here by one participant saying that sharing is caring, but not in all cases. Sharing of code is well established. It's non-instrumental. It's for the greater good. For me, it is modern software development, one participant said. And also we see that sharing data is different from sharing code. So we don't really see that there's any established practice for this. It's not clear that you could piggyback on existing sort of processes for how you share code. And then also sharing data about software engineering is different than sharing data in software engineering. We see that the participants saw an increased risk to the brand when talking about this kind of data. So where to go from here? We see several possibilities. To begin with, of course, this is a limited study, so it's natural to think about an expanded version of the study. But also it would be interesting to explore mechanisms to build on the shared professional practice around sharing that we saw. And also to study data sharing in other software engineering areas, for instance, within security. And also study other cases in open data-driven tuning of software engineering tools to see what overlap there may be in with this approach. Thank you for your attention.